there was a camera called the Canon. I cannot believe I can't remember the name of this camera.
What, the
you got to look this up.
Point and shoot?
No, okay, I'm gonna describe it to you. I have two of them in my office. It's the most beautiful camera.
What is going on, people of the internet? Welcome back to another episode of the Waveform podcast. We're your hosts. I'm Marquez.
I'm David.
And if you're watching the video version, you've already noticed that David is next to me, which means on the other side, we've got two new hosts for this bonus episode. That's right, you're not seeing things. It's not Friday. You can still do dishes, but we have some extra fun stuff to talk about in the world of YouTube creators and their camera choices. So, without any further ado, Eric and Rich, take it away.
Hello. Oh, that was pretty great.
They're in sync.
Yes. So I'm Eric. I'm one half of the studio channel. Rich and I are regularly confused in the studio.
Yeah.
Pretty much everyone thinks that we are the same person. That is a good thing. Yeah. So hello, I'm Eric. Many people refer to me as Rich. That is okay.
Hello, I'm Rich, and no one refers to me as Eric.
That is not true. That happened 10 minutes ago. Adam called you Eric.
That's true, yeah.
Rich, what do we do for a living?
Me and Eric, we're the studio producers, and we make our behind-the-scenes videos here at MKBHD.
So our last big behind-the-scenes video, we got a lot of feedback that it just didn't feel super attainable, that there's only so much about behind-the-scenes at MKBHD that can be actionable for people. So we had an idea to do pretty much the biggest behind-the-scenes video in history.
Yeah, so we decided to talk to some of our favorite creators, ranging from 20,000 subscribers all the way up to 20 million.
And, well, you know, almost 20 million any day now. Subscribe to the MKBHD channel. Marquez needs more subs. And our goal is to not just understand what cameras these creators really like, but really to answer the question, does gear even really matter in YouTube in 2025? The answer is a lot more nuanced than I think we were expecting.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I feel like in the world of what camera do you use on YouTube, there are some trends. There are some historical trends. There are some current modern day popular options, but there isn't really like any one standout number one that I can think of as far as a single model.
Don't know if I agree with
But I do think there are standout brands that are dominating.
Okay, well, all right, there's evidence. There's evidence for and against that. Okay. So the first camera brand that we wanted to start with is a camera brand we're very familiar with here, and a lot of people aren't very familiar with. Mr. Red Marquez Brownlee.
Red.
A lot of creators see Red as this sort of aspirational brand. Oh, maybe one day I could shoot on a Red camera. So we wanted to bring in one creator who actually shoots all their videos on Red, and another who bought a couple Red cameras, but isn't really using them anymore. Why do you shoot your videos on Red? Let's start there. We talked to other creators.
Wait, you mean Nikon?
Well, they got bought by Nikon, but I do shoot Red. I do shoot Red.
That was a deep cut.
I can really I can break it down to basically two main reasons why I shoot Red. I was shooting Canon for a very long time, up until around 2015, I think. Wow, it's been a decade. And yeah, I know. But the two reasons that I'd switched to my first ever Red camera, which was an Epic W, I believe, at the time, were...
Really? That's what it was called?
Oh, yeah. It was called the Red Epic W.
Oh, man.
Or maybe it was a Scarlet W before the Epic W. But one, resolution. Two, color science.
Yeah.
So one, resolution was I was shooting 1080i on a C100. And I was looking for my first 4K camera. And I skipped right to the Red Raw 4K camera. And it was plenty sharp, and that was like one of my criteria for a new camera. The other was it had this amazing color science, and I could change the white balance after I shot, which was this neat little thing called raw video, and the colors looked amazing. I could really make videos look the way I wanted them to. So
for people that don't know, when you take video, generally your camera is compressing that video. It's applying basically a LUT or lookup table effectively to it by compressing it into an MP4 or something like that. And it's making a bunch of decisions about color. Raw video is just a lot of the information, most of the information is taking in. It's not completely real raw, video. That sounds like a
Compressed raw.
Google Gaga, Lady Gaga. Sorry, Lady Gaga lyric. But yeah, it's compressed raw.
Yeah,
because it takes it in, but because of that, it's not applying, or it's allowing you to still adjust those values like white balance. So
I feel like working with Red is relatively easy, in large part because Rich does most of the shooting, but also we have like great computers for like a good, healthy post workflow.
Yeah.
But we called with Austin Evans, who actually accidentally bought 2 Red cameras.
accidentally.
Yeah, do you want to?
Sure. I believe Austin had Scarlet W on pre-order, and then Epic W came out, so he bought that, and then they
Can't believe they called it that.
You didn't like the W for
Epic
weapon?
W.
The W stand for weapon, right?
Really hard to fly with these cameras.
Yeah. So before working here, I was a cinematographer, and I got to work with our good friend Austin Evans, and he had a much different experience shooting Red.
Very different.
But the problem was, it was a bad camera. Like, yes, if you have a whole film crew and a technical department and a whole lot of patience, it was lovely. But the problem was, like there was one shoot where we were in Austin. So we were doing a shoot with Audi. We were on Circuit of the Americas, an actual proper F1 track. And it is Texas in summer. And it was like 100 degrees outside. The Red completely gave out on us 15 minutes in the shoot, like just wouldn't power on. It wasn't like overheated necessarily. It just gave up. Right. So luckily we had like an A6500 as a B cam, which we had to shoot the rest of the video on. That was one of those moments where I'm like, this is not it. Red had its moments, but even when we shot Red, we shot it in ProRes. Like we never, ever used the 8K because who needs 8K, right? Especially back, 6-7 years ago. So, we still technically have our Red, and it is a lovely paperweight.
I mean, we got to make something clear. Like, Red cameras are studio cameras. They are they're used for movies.
Yeah.
Right? In very controlled environments.
Yeah.
Right.
It was a weird thing when Marquez and Austin and Jonathan Morrison and Lou went and decided to buy Red cameras for YouTube videos. Like, that was extremely novel.
Yes.
It's still novel. It's still novel because the newest models are still extremely expensive. You can get Scarlet W for like $3,000 now, but back then that was like nobody was doing that.
But even if you bought the Scarlet W for $3,000, that's the thing about Red cameras is like people will think that a Red camera is something that's like maybe something to consider as a creator. Like, oh, I'm going to work my way up and build out a Red ecosystem.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's probably not a good idea.
it's a locked off kind of situation.
Probably not a good idea.
I would say a Red camera is the equivalent of it's a sensor in a little box, and that box is a computer.
Yeah.
With fans and memory and all this other compute, and you can attach as much or as little to this box as you want to build it out for whatever you're shooting.
Yeah.
So if you've ever seen like a Hollywood movie set, it's built out to the size of a dog. I'm trying to think
that's pretty accurate.
I'm trying to think of like a size reference. Like
Yeah.
it's got
Small dog.
multiple monitors and a ton of cables coming out of it, and it's got obviously the memory isn't plugged into the side, but it's got all accessories for shooting external memory and all this other stuff.
It's the
And
brain. That's why
it's
it's
not
called the brain.
ergonomic at all. You might have 2 or 3 handles on it for maybe that one time they're going to do that one handheld shot for that thing they planned for that thing that next day, but it is very much not like the C100 I came from, which is built for one person to shoot everything.
Yep.
So the single shooter camera experience is very different.
Yep.
That said, I've been able to build out my version of a single camera shooter Red.
Right.
I found just the right set of handles, top handle, record button, monitor, accessories that for me, it's just light enough and just ergonomic enough that I can make it work. And it's worth it because the footage that comes out of that box is second to none. I have not seen anything come close to touching the quality of a Red image off that sensor.
We're going to notice a pattern where if you're a tech YouTuber or like a knowledge YouTuber, you end up seeing like pretty weird camera choices because the environments that you're shooting in are relatively controlled. And the more that creators move into niches or spaces where the environments are less controlled, I think the more they all congregated around like 2 brands.
Okay.
But let's wait until we hit those brands because Red was recently bought by Nikon. And we were not really thinking about bringing Nikon in to this video. Nikon hasn't really had a rep, especially in like video for creators. But when we hopped on the phone with Becca Farsace, who's like como se dice, the GOAT. She said like,
I think this will come as a surprise to most that I actually use predominantly Nikon systems now.
we asked like, what do you like about it? And she described the image as like,
Describing color is weird, but there's something about it that feels like homier and cozier, whereas Sony, I feel like, is very sharp, a little bit punchy. And yeah, Nikon just naturally, right out of camera, I can have something that I'm really pleased with.
Yeah, Nikon has had a bit of a renaissance in the last like 2 or so years, primarily because they were pretty late to move to mirrorless.
Yeah.
So a mirrorless camera is a camera where it takes in the image, it goes straight to the sensor, and then you see what the sensor sees. Whereas a normal camera, a DSLR, has a mirror that you see what the mirror sees, which is not the actual image or exposure. While everybody else, well, not everybody else, but most of the other brands were on these like second, third generation mirrorless cameras. Nikon was just releasing their first mirrorless camera.
yeah, no, we were all the kids in like the YouTube cook groups I was in back in the day.
Yeah.
That's what we called them instead of group chats.
Yeah.
We would pretty much everyone switched to the Sony ecosystem around this time and like never looked back because Sony was really the first
very early
manufacturer
to
to bring
mirrorless.
cheap mirrorless. I guess Panasonic like kind of beat them, but
Micro Four Thirds.
yeah,
it's different.
We'll get into it.
We'll
Do
get
you
into
have
it.
context, David, on why Nikon was so slow to switch?
I think that it's not too dissimilar to why Kodak was so, even though they invented the digital camera, they just were like, no. They were just having so much success, and like Canon and Nikon are the two,
those were
like
the
they were
photography.
the two biggest camera brands, right? They were making all of the money, and they were making all the money on SLRs and DSLRs. And so they were like, I don't really think there's a huge benefit to this technology. Our photographers are super used to using DSLRs. Yeah, I don't know. I think people had just gotten really in their way about it. Also, the Nikon crowd tended to be either older people who were shooting like bird photography or like wildlife photography. Nikon is famous for bird photography. You will very rarely meet any other brand that
On the
shoots bird
box,
photography.
they're the one with the cheetah on the box, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense.
And then they also are very popular for concert photography. So, because their low light used to be, well, it still is very good, but for that reason as well.
So I was talking to Becca about like where Nikon goes in the future. Like, are we going to see a Nikon comeback, especially with like the red kind of
Acquisition.
acquisition?
I have no knowledge of what's going to happen, but I think reds are very expensive systems. Not only is the camera expensive, but the amount of footage that you're going to shoot is going to take up a lot of hard drive space. Hard drives are expensive. And I wonder if Nikon, who is, really affordable cameras, they price their cameras very competitively. Coming together with red means that we're going to get something that's more affordable with the red logo on it or in a red camera. I wonder. I don't know. I can only hope.
Do you guys think that the future of this acquisition is like more and more people could buy red camera? Like maybe because it sounds like Nikon is relatively accessible now, but no one's just thinking about it. Yeah. Maybe people are going to start thinking about red cameras.
I think there is some level of cachet attached to the red name from the red Epic and the red Mysterium Dragon. And back in the day, they were very big in the cinema world, and the directors that shot with red, like they have that cachet. So weirdly, I feel like it could be Nikon, or as they actually said it to me when I talked to them recently, Nikon. It could be their way of going up into that cinema world. Yeah, Nikon.
I believe that's the
Nikon.
correct pronunciation, Nikon, right?
Really?
Yeah.
No, don't do that.
I know none of us have said it like that. That's apparently how it's said.
Yeah.
But yeah, it could be the other way around as well. It could be some of red and bringing their technologies down in price and more accessible into Nikon cameras if they get there.
So just about 2 weeks ago, so Red makes a camera called the Komodo, which is, by the way, their most affordable camera. They actually made that camera in response to all of these mirrorless cameras being more and more affordable for creators. They wanted to offer like this in-between spot where it's more expensive than a mirrorless camera, but it's like still a cinema camera.
Sure.
Yeah.
So just about 2 weeks ago, they started selling one with a Nikon Z mount, which is the lens mount that the Z series Nikon mirrorless cameras have. So now they sell both on the Komodo as well as I believe on the newest one. What is the one that you have?
V-Raptor?
V-Raptor, yeah. I think they also have a mount for the V-Raptor now that Nikon Z lenses can go onto. So it is very early, by the way, in the acquisition. It only officially went through like quite recently, and it's quite surprising that they're doing this. They did that. The other thing that they have done in the last month or so is Nikon can shoot Z-RAW internally. And there's all of this, or NRAW, sorry, NRAW, not Z-RAW. There's all of this lore as to Nikon and Red suing each other over internal RAW video. Compressed RAW video. Eventually, Nikon just bought Red and they dropped the lawsuit. But
Convenient.
I wonder if these two unrelated factors are connected.
But the NRAW that the Nikon Z6 series and Z9 and whatever can shoot, Red, they just announced a bunch of LUTs with Red that try to give it the Red sensor look on these Nikon cameras.
Yeah.
So it's clearly not going to be exactly the same. It is a LUT, it is a lookup table. It's not the same as the sensor technology, but they are working together in ways to bring the Red cachet to Nikon and to bring the Nikon accessibility to Red.
Yeah. Okay, so speaking of accessibility, we dove into Blackmagic with two creators who are cinematographers by day, Michael Tobin and Brittany Genet, and also have their own YouTube channels about cinematography. Rich, could you give us like context on Blackmagic? How do people think about Blackmagic?
I feel like people think about Blackmagic as the accessible Alexa, in the sense that the color science is beautiful, easy to work with.
Great menu system.
Yeah. The only thing they're lacking, autofocus, which is a big thing.
It is.
Well, but it's deeper than that. Okay, so when we talked to Michael Tobin, he gave this great analogy. He said,
I think the easiest way to put it is they're very similar to Apple, that they have their own kind of walled garden, right? They make the camera, they make the codec, they make the software, they have the best color grading software on the planet. And so you just have this beautiful like workflow throughout the whole way.
you can actually get DaVinci Resolve Studio when you buy a Blackmagic camera. This is the only camera brand you buy where you also get like a full stack professional grade video editing software thrown in there.
Yeah.
Unless
you count Red Cine X. Most people don't.
No one chops.
does
No one
that.
is
Yeah, that's crazy.
But so his whole thing is like you can build like a full workflow with Blackmagic.
Totally.
When we talked to Brittany, she was just like,
wow, the image quality is so beautiful. It's such a beautiful sensor that comes out the Blackmagic. And I think, you know, a lot of times like with social media, it's really hard to explain characteristics of a camera and the differences of why you would go for different cameras. But for me, when I had the Blackmagic 6K, it was when I wanted to get into actual filmmaking. So shooting short films. And I think that really, the image quality really set it apart because you were getting this beautiful cinematic image for like such a low price. And it's one of those things where like, I know we all talk about like what cinematic is, but to me, owning both cameras, the FX3 and the Blackmagic, I don't have to put diffusion on a Blackmagic glass. It's automatically a softer look coming out of the camera itself. It pairs really nicely with a lot of lenses because of like the image quality that it has. It has false color, so it has certain aspects that you would use in filmmaking that makes it easier for you on set. And if you want to grow from just, you know, like doing like the everyday content to being a filmmaker, it's just a good transitional camera.
she was using her Blackmagic for YouTube and then she stopped using it for another camera brand. There are like some pretty clear downsides to shooting Blackmagic that we were able to get into with them. Have either of you guys shot Blackmagic?
Yeah.
I've gotten very close multiple times, but always got scared away at the last second.
Yeah.
Whether it was because of the workflow, I don't want to have to use DaVinci Resolve, or if it was because of, you know, I've seen a lot of, so you say the sensor is beautiful and the color science is great. I've watched, and maybe this is from the beginning, early days, I've watched a lot of test footage that I didn't like from the Blackmagic cameras.
Really?
And so if I were ever to switch cameras, I would want it to at least match what I thought I was getting out of my current camera, and I never thought that Blackmagic was doing that. Maybe it's much closer now. And I know there's the Ursa 8K and all sorts of other stuff, but I haven't seen test footage that tempted me.
So well, ironically, so Blackmagic is like generally like the cheaper version of a Red in that it allows you to shoot raw video. This was like, it was one of the alternatives that gave you that raw capability. And generally when you're shooting raw, we are different because we have extremely controlled lighting where you just want the highest quality image at a normal look. But most of the time when you're shooting raw, you're actually shooting raw because you want to stylize your image.
Yeah.
Or correct for it. We just shot
correct for it.
We just shot the Pixel 9a hands-on in New York City.
The worst
Rich and I
lighting
were weird lighting, like spotlights with these orange lights, and then go outside for a few minutes and shoot out there, and then shoot in the hallway, and then come back inside. It's like I don't want to have to do some sort of manual white balancing every time. In post, we can nail every single shot with perfect white
Which, by the way, when I worked at Android Authority, was the most annoying freaking thing. There'd be like 50 of us reporters in one room, and all of our videos look horrible because the lighting was terrible, super yellow, and then we'd all watch Marquez's video, and it would be perfect.
Yeah. You're like,
That's the advantage of red, right?
That's a red.
Because of
why
red.
she red.
Yeah.
Okay, dude, it's so funny talking to you guys about this because I think like when we talk to creators, their take on why they didn't like Blackmagic had like nothing to do with color or like the big reason is like
Up until the Pixis, the body style on the Pocket series is a reason a lot of people hated it because it was like this DSLR vibe, but also cinema camera components that just didn't make a lot of sense. Battery life is rough. That's definitely, you need a lot of those. I'd say the biggest downfall is people like autofocus. And there's no Blackmagic cameras that have any autofocus to it.
It's just more to the workflow than just being able to put a card in, shoot it, take it out, and put it in your computer. So it's just the fact that I still have to use V mounts, get all my cords out, all of those things. It's just like, all right, chill. And because it's not autofocus, I have to use a monitor on it so I can see myself and make sure that I can try to manually focus to make sure I'm in focus. So
there's no autofocus.
Yep.
On the more affordable ones,
especially if you're a single person shooting, like you just want to have autofocus to know that you're in focus.
I get it.
Yeah, it makes sense if you're like a prosumer, I think, and if you're like making a lot of YouTube videos.
I think if you're a DP, or you're saying like
the solo shooter.
if you're like a young DP,
Right.
Yeah.
I think a Pocket 6K could be in your universe.
Especially if you have a crew and like you're in controlled environments for lighting.
Yeah, like a relatively small camera crew. There are certainly better cinema cameras. Well, maybe not certainly. I guess it depends on how much you really like Resolve.
Yeah.
Because so much of this is like, can you dial in the right post workflow with Resolve to feel really confident that, you know, everything you shoot with Blackmagic, you can get a unique image.
The thing about Blackmagic, especially a number of years ago, was that they were like the cheaper red in that the bodies were made of like a light plastic. So they were also sort of just a camera brain computer, but in a much cheaper body. They didn't have any sort of like flip out screen or anything that where you could see yourself. They were very much like, we took the parts that you need and we put some stuff around it and here, just like shoot the raw video, do it all in post. And because of that, they didn't include the things like autofocus and like these other capabilities. They were also adapting to like everyone else's lenses. So they didn't really have the control that like a native camera brand that has their own lenses can do either. So
one last, I guess, kind of quote on Blackmagic. We talked to Brandon Lee, who was the like head of cinematography for Linus Tech Tips, and they briefly shot every video on Short Circuit, which our boy Jono was responsible for at one point. Thank you, Jono, for providing the money for my employment. So Short Circuit on LTT was all Blackmagic for a little while, and Brandon said they ran into some pretty frustrating technical issues just in terms of like how they manage. I think it was like mostly like codec management. And there were a lot of things that, because Blackmagic is proprietary, you have to build out these workflows that in theory could be better, but you almost need to be like a Blackmagic domain expert in order to get these cameras to be like excellent cameras. I think it takes time for mastery over these. You could say that about a lot of cameras, but Blackmagic especially because of its relationship with software and the hardware.
So Blackmagic has this software called DaVinci Resolve that they acquired quite a long time ago in 2009 or so. And it used to mostly be a color editor. You would bring your footage into that software just to do the color. But over the last like 4 or 5 years, they've updated it over and over again, and now it's like a quite strong nonlinear editor. So a lot of people have left both Premiere and Final Cut over to here, especially if they have a Blackmagic camera, because it is a lot different. It's a lot better for that footage. And it also uses these things like nodes and whatever. But yeah, I think if you invest in the Blackmagic system and
if you commit to it,
but it's probably a little bit tough to do that in like a studio like Linus Tech Tips, where you got to teach everyone a bunch of new things and like teach everyone a specific workflow.
Especially if you have an old workflow. If you build from the ground up with Blackmagic in mind, it could actually probably be a very efficient stack. But you need to like take the time to understand the tech.
Sure.
All right, David, I would take a quick sip of Red Bull if I were you, because we're about to talk about Fuji cameras. And Mr. Amel,
Yes.
you in many ways, to much of the internet, to much of the world, you're an introduction to a lot of the science and a sort of an understanding for how Fuji cameras work and what makes them special.
Oh, yeah.
That's perfect.
Bring the Fuji.
Sure. I'm bringing the Fuji.
So I guess to start here, in terms of a Fuji image, why are so many people gravitating to it? Why are Fuji cameras becoming this sort of like viral phenomena? What is it about these cameras has enabled them to kind of like leak into the social fabric?
TikTok.
No, not just TikTok.
That's why I bought mine. No, and you.
Oh, it was trendy. I think I know.
It's true.
It was kind of trendy.
Yeah, it was popping off on TikTok.
Okay, but it was trending not necessarily because... Okay, there's a lot of things. A lot of the answers to a lot of the questions you were asking me, the answer is the democratization of something. You know, when we're like, creators are picking up this brand because this brand has finally brought this feature that used to be on these inaccessible thing to an accessible thing.
Okay.
Right? So Fujifilm democratized color because it takes a very long time to get really good at doing good color. In 2016 or 2017 or so, I bought my first Fuji camera. It was the Fujifilm X-T2. It was my first camera at all.
Whoa.
I knew nothing about what I was doing at all. I started making videos, and everyone on YouTube was like, oh, what's your color workflow? And there's all these videos talking about like, how I grade. And I was just like, Astia. By the way, Astia is a film stock. Fujifilm, if you do not know, they have all these film stocks that you can choose to shoot with. They are color profiles on the camera. You do not only have to shoot with them in JPEG, you can also apply them to video.
Yeah.
And so I literally was not color grading at all. I was just choosing the one that fit what I was shooting the best.
Yeah. We talked with this creator named Colt Kirwin, who is like, I don't know if you guys have seen his stuff. His videos are just like so charming and fun. And we asked him about Fuji, and he said like,
but yeah, instead of competing with the big camera brands, Fuji has had a different experience where your JPEGs magically look really good, and you can kind of customize within camera versus throwing it into Lightroom and having to do that already. So I feel like Fuji has really gotten a cult following in the past couple years because of their specific film emulations, and that, oh, you don't have to shoot RAW anymore. I just shoot JPEG, blah, blah, blah. And it's nice. I think it's a breath of fresh air when everything is like competing on the technicalities. It's like, okay, we don't have to be perfect. Let's just make something fun to use. Yeah.
And that keyword, fun, came up over and over and over again when we talked to people.
So Fuji's the nothing phone of
I think
camera brands.
I think nothing is more utilitarian.
Really?
Because I would buy my mom
It's like the
nothing
Moto
phone.
Razor.
I think so. Okay,
like the
that's
Razor.
fair. Yeah, I guess the fun aspect of like, we're not going to have the craziest specs,
Right.
but when you use it, you will feel things.
Yeah.
So Brandon, who is like the chief cinematographer at LTT, I'm keeping resume. He said like,
Fuji is probably the most fun in terms of all the brands. Because if you've never owned a camera before and you're just starting out, I think that they allow it, that the tactile feeling of the lens is the way that the cameras are built, the button placement, the shutter angle, the way that dials are used on the cameras. It's all very well thought out. And especially if I think back to myself as a beginner, like that used to be kind of the appeal of Canon. Is Canon was very approachable, and it wasn't super like difficult. You don't have to think about a lot of stuff. You could just start learning. And that's the thing too, is I find that what Fuji picked up that idea from Canon is that they pushed it further by saying, well, let's not just make it easy and accessible. Let's make it like an experience that feels good.
So fun and colors popped up over and over again in our interviews. But if you want to buy a Fuji camera specifically to make videos, we talked to a creator named Joshua De La Victoria, who does, he's a touring guitar player, and he'll shoot like guitar videos, either teaching people guitar or just like doing cool covers. And he needed like a compact, simple, easy camera to shoot.
And then using the Fuji, I kind of fell in love with the photography side of it, because I mainly bought it for video. And then I was like, oh, this thing also shoots awesome photos, of course. It made photography really fun in a way that I think other cameras don't.
I think that these are probably still cameras.
There's a whole era of this happening. This may be around the same time so I remember also getting into still cameras getting good at video. Like Canon 5D kind of was the beginning of a lot of these trends where, oh snap, big sensor, shallow depth of field, looks like movie. I can make movie with still camera. And if you put the right lenses on, a 5D and a 5D Mark II, you can get this incredible, beautiful video. And then I think around GH2 or GH3, people started like hacking them and putting the Magic Lantern software on them and getting higher bit rates out of them and doing the same sort of stuff with those cameras. And there was this little mini era of, this is actually a camera for photos, but I can make videos that look pretty good with it.
A big thing for me was I started doing more like work for clients, like photo stuff or video stuff for other people. Because like, I guess I had somewhat of a distinct style that other people kind of wanted. So then I was starting to do some freelance stuff. And I was having a lot of trouble with the Fuji did not have any kind of image stabilization. And I didn't want to invest in like a huge rig or like I don't like using gimbals. I find them really annoying to use. And the autofocus in the Fuji was horrible.
So at one period of time, all of a sudden the processor got fast enough, the sensors got good enough readout speed where every camera could be a hybrid camera. So with the person you talked to, it is understandable that they would have switched off of Fuji because Fuji still is geared towards the photography workflow. But I would argue that if you shoot manual for everything and you control everything, you want that, they're still very good for that.
I think that makes a lot of, because I think the big things that we heard for why people maybe don't like Fuji for video are oftentimes there's a 30-minute record limit. That's not like a hard and fast rule, but oftentimes depending on which Fuji camera you're shooting on.
Yeah, that used to be
a hard and fast rule.
It was an import tax rule because basically if it could record for over 30 minutes, it was taxed as a video camera, which is a much higher tax.
Is insane.
And it would have jacked the price of the camera up by a ton. So most of the
That's why a lot of cameras from that day had a 29-minute, 59-second record limit.
Exactly. It was very dumb.
It's ridiculous. And then the other thing is like,
by the way,
autofocus isn't fantastic for Fuji cameras. Like there's a lot of stuff where like if you're run and gun, you just have to like figure out which settings would be good. But if you really like stylistic color and there's not a lot of like intense movement in your videos, it's like it's a real contender.
I would agree with that. Also, just side note, the Fuji X-T series cameras, they use APS-C sensors, which are smaller than full frame. And then they also have this GFX series, which is larger than full frame, it's medium format. They never wanted to compete in full frame because Canon, Sony, Nikon are all in this space.
Right.
So they were like, we can dominate the APS-C space and we can dominate the medium format space. So they never even competed with full frame, which I think is another reason that people didn't start using them for video either, because people wanted that full frame experience for video.
Right. Okay, so speaking of sensor size,
Yeah.
I want to talk about Panasonic because even though Panasonic does have full frame cameras right now, I largely associate Panasonic and their brand with they do a lot before everyone else.
Yes.
They oftentimes don't get good credit for it. Their color science is a little weird, and they have micro four thirds sensors, which have, I would argue, more downsides than upsides. But what are your initial impressions on Panasonic before we dive into some of the conversations we had with
I
creators?
feel like I'm like making smartphone analogies in my head. They're like the OnePlus. Like people who are really, really into specific sets of specs and things they want to get out of a camera
100%.
might like the Panasonic move.
Yeah.
So understandable why some people will gravitate towards it, but why they might not become like a mainstream huge option.
I also note, because they were Micro Four Thirds, the sensor size will dictate what you can do on the camera because you have to have so much data readout. Panasonic was the company that brought a lot of features to the camera industry because they had the smallest sensor, so it was easier for them to move the data.
Optimize.
They could add the features because they didn't have to move as much data in order to allow things like log recording and things like that.
Right.
So the way it always went was it was like, oh, we got 5-axis stabilization in Micro Four Thirds, and now it comes to APS-C, and now it comes to full frame.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So I guess for those following along, if you're still listening but you're also confused, thank you so much.
I know this is not our normal waveform
Thank you
conversation.
so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but essentially, like Panasonic uses smaller sensors, right? And that leads to on paper
They now make full
more
frame
advancements.
cameras, but,
Yes,
yeah.
But a lot of their, I guess, a lot of the reason that Panasonic has historically been able to be ahead of the game
because they use smaller
they've
sensors.
used smaller sensors.
Correct.
So
A series with computational photography.
anyway, okay, okay. So we were only able to find one creator who regularly shoots on Panasonic. His name is Stuart Hicks. He's an architecture professor in Chicago, and he makes videos about architecture. Shout out Chicago, greatest city on earth. And
Nice.
what is it? New Jersey? Jersey? Hoboken? No.
Top 10.
San
Chicago.
Francisco.
LA is the
Top
best.
10.
San Francisco.
Okay. All right. Well, delusion aside,
It's right there, guys.
So we asked him, like, why do you shoot on Panasonic? Like, your videos are gorgeous, but why did you do that?
So I still use the very first camera that I ever purchased for doing this stuff, and it's a Panasonic GH5 from the year 2020.
And he goes, he still uses the first camera he ever bought. He bought the GH5 in 2020, and he kind of immediately just went into things he didn't like about it.
I mean, one question is, are you going to be in a studio or out in the world? I think that makes a big difference. In the studio here, for instance, the autofocus doesn't matter. I can set it and it doesn't become a problem. GH5 has notoriously awful autofocus. It is unusable. I made videos at the way I learned that was I made a video where I used autofocus and I thought it'd be fine because I was just sitting there, and a viewer commented about how it was unwatchable because of the focus breathing.
He's like, the GH5 has kind of notoriously awful autofocus. He's frustrated with a lot of aspects of Micro Four Thirds. And then he's like, he loved things like shallower depth of field, stuff like that. And so in addition to like the actual sort of marketing advantage of Micro Four Thirds, we also asked Tyler Stalman, who's like this excellent camera creator. So he's like, there are 3 basic reasons. When we called him, his video was like gorgeous, and we're like, what are you shooting this on, bro? And he's like, he's shooting on a GH7. He was shooting on Panasonic.
Yeah.
And he said,
there are 3 use cases that I think Micro Four Thirds is actually the best for. Because in many ways, less depth of field, less dynamic range, noise isn't as good, but there are some things it does better at. One that we're looking into right now is we're quoting on a client that we currently do their vertical social media, but we might want to do the same campaigns in horizontal, and a Micro Four Thirds sensor is as close to square as you get. So if you need to shoot for both formats at the same time, there's really no better sensor. Like, you get almost a square. So when you crop both, they both look good and are not compromised. And a new firmware update actually lets you move multiple markers around. So for me, I would say that, like, I want to use the bottom 16:9 of the image for YouTube. And then I want to use the center 9:16 for Instagram. And you can see those markers as you're shooting, which I think is pretty amazing, and you can only do on something like the GH7.
this is usually like referred to as like open gate
recording.
shooting. What's open gate?
Generally, when you have a sensor and you project the light over the sensor, and generally you're not using the whole sensor because displays are usually 16:9, 2:1, whatever. When you're recording on that sensor, you're only recording a certain amount of it. Open gate recording just like the throughput thing that we were just talking about with Micro Four Thirds, where they advance faster than other companies, is where you use the entire sensor and you read out the 4 sensor, which is normally a 4:3 aspect ratio.
Reason number 2 that Tyler said Micro Four Thirds could be useful is as an overhead camera, like just like a simple top down, because Micro Four Thirds traditionally you're not going to get a super shallow depth of field, so it's just clutch, so you can get like everything in
Smaller
focus.
sensor, more in focus.
Yeah, exactly. And then the third reason is because it's a smaller sensor, so generally stabilization is better.
Yeah, totally.
Smaller, lighter body.
Totally.
Also, really cool bonus that 99% of people wouldn't care about, but people would yell at us if we didn't mention.
Perfect.
Tyler was using ARRI colors on his Panasonic camera because Panasonic has, like, I guess, an agreement with ARRI to like optimize ARRI color science for Panasonic. So if you wanted to shoot ARRI and get a bit of an ARRI look,
I did not know that.
We just find like a really, really, really open, wide aperture lens plus ARRI color science and then we rent an ARRI camera and we get to do a photo shoot of you holding it.
Interesting.
Yeah, I wonder how much of that is similar to the red color science on the NRAW, because when I applied those LUTs, they did not really look like red. They're very nice.
Tyler spoke pretty highly.
Yeah.
I know Ellis has mentioned like a production company as well that like loves shooting on Panasonic and has shot like these excellent shorts.
Stepping in here. No, they're a really cool YouTube video called Media Division that does like really, really, really intense camera stuff. And their whole thing is if you want to buy a cinema camera, just buy a GH6 or a GH7 or whatever the most
use the ARRI
recent one
color.
is. Yeah, they're just like there's no but that's them.
Super interesting.
Also, I mean, it can often be easier to adapt more lenses as well to smaller sensors because you can more easily cover the sensor. You can't adapt a Micro Four Thirds sensor to a full frame. Micro Four Thirds lens to a full frame camera.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, guys. We have one more brand before we get to our break.
Yeah, I noticed the elephant in the room.
Well, we have two more
looming
brands,
over your shoulder.
We're missing 2, yeah.
Yeah.
So we're going to do one more, then do a break.
That was the elephant
talk
for all
about
the audio listeners.
Okay. That's good. Yeah.
Okay.
We technically didn't do Canon yet either.
Okay, so we're on. So I want to talk about Canon.
Okay.
So
Peter McCannon?
Nice.
Whoa. That works way too well.
I just made that up.
we can end the video here. Okay. We can hear that Red Bull slur. That was crazy. Okay. When people talk about Canon cameras, they talk about it like with this insane nostalgia. Like, I loved them. Like when, so we had Casey Neistat come in because when I think about a creator who shoots on Canon, I still think of Casey Neistat.
Yeah.
That daily vlog, the 300-day sprint insane thing, that was all Canon. And so when we asked Casey to come in and just tell us about the cameras he used.
There was a camera called the Canon. I cannot believe I can't remember the name of this camera. The HBO show Catfish, you know that show? Like, be careful who you date. That show was predicated by a documentary called Catfish that my friends made. And most of the documentary Catfish that was at like Sundance Film Festival, MTV bought it, put it in 2,000 movie theaters. That movie was shot primarily on T1. T1? Are you looking it up right now?
I'm looking up. There's a few.
No, is a vertical form factor. It was way before that. Try Canon T1, T. Yes. Okay. And it was like the first kind of point and shoot that was really optimized for video, not for stills. No. A beautiful. Where's my phone? Right now, if you're watching this at home, everybody in this room is on their phones trying to figure out the name of this camera. It's a stunning camera. Go to eBay and try to buy it if you can find one. Not even. Is that beautiful?
Yeah.
What's the name of the Canon camera that was like all stainless steel? It was really small. It's the one Rel filmed Catfish on. Like the flip out side. That's it. What's the name of that, Marquez? TX1. Van Neistat knew it. Thanks, Van.
Yeah, I still have mine.
Me too. I have two, but the Canon TX1.
First of all, like that was a very fun experience getting to talk to him. I think as a youth in this space, it's very cool being able to go and interview Casey. Felt like a career moment for me. I don't think he knows my name. That's cool. My name is Rich.
Yep.
My name is Earl.
But like so many people would wax poetic about like Canon in the past. Like we asked Colt Kierwin, who's like my Gen Z Casey Neistat. He said like
the way I see it was Canon had a chokehold on the market. If you want to be a real photographer, you get a Canon camera, right? And there's still that boat. And then Sony kind of like they were in the DSLR world, and then Sony kind of took that leap to do mirrorless cameras. And in the beginning, they're like, Sony's color science is not good, or the battery life sucks, stick with Canon. And then I feel like now the mirrorless market has taken over everything. So that's where Sony has kind of like, quote unquote, failed, I guess, and then continued to iterate until they perfected it.
Similar to Nikon, they released their first mirrorless camera like the same time Nikon did. Like it took them a really long time, but they had a very strong hold, this strong squared hold on the like prosumer DSLR market. Right. They had the 1DX camera, which was like insane. Canon, the reason they're good for like Casey Neistat is because their autofocus has traditionally been the best, like some of the best in the entire industry. Right. It has changed a little bit more recently, but up until recently, like they had the best autofocus in the industry. By far.
It's also color science.
I find the advantages of the Canon in terms of color are more at the entry level. Like if you don't want to touch it, it's just going to give you something pleasing right away, no effort. Once you take it a step deeper, like for professionals, I don't actually think it matters. I think a Sony and a Canon and a Lumix and even where Fuji is right now, like everything that has a modern log profile can be matched, which wasn't the case a few years ago.
We talked with a creator named Inga, who's a food creator, and she just like makes these great food videos and wants to focus on the food. And she said that someone in the comments described her videos as like a Rembrandt painting.
A lot of like why I do what I do is I want people to have like a better relationship with food. I want them to like be introduced to cooking in a way that doesn't feel like burdensome. And so I think the lighting I use kind of want to translate to that, like not just like of course I want it to feel warm, I want it to feel comfortable, but I also want it to feel like it's not something that's overly produced in the sense of like, oh, we're in a studio and like we're going to bang through all these recipes, and more just like this could be an average day in your life too. So that kind of translates a little bit to that. But I also think like recently there was a comment that said the color was a little bit like Rembrandt style. I think my lighting, because wintertime, it's darker now. So my natural lighting is a little darker overall, but I think it kind of played into it a little bit, which I kind of also like, but I think it just fits sort of the homey vibes overall.
Like it's this soft inviting.
It's always like a little bit
colors.
warm with like slightly raised shadows, and it's kind of this like dreamy, warm tone thing. Canon is very, very often used in the wedding industry for that reason, because you don't have to do as much editing if you're just like editing some JPEGs, because it has very warm, natural skin tones.
For the next bonus up, I'll get married if this video hits 200K views, and then I'll do my bonus episode there, shot on Canon.
Nice.
Does your girlfriend know about this?
What girlfriend, David?
It is fascinating.
We're getting married, David.
I will say it is fascinating to see the reasons, the very, very specific reasons that certain cameras and brands get selected for certain applications. That is like, okay, the wedding industry, the warmth, the friendliness, okay, Canon color works for that.
Yeah.
I have my own reason actually for red too, which I've told the story before, but skin tones, specifically darker skin tones with red color science, not even close.
Yeah.
No one else is close. And I think there's like a bunch of other reasons, like people might choose Sony, Blackmagic, ARRI for specific color reasons for whatever projects there are. And then it's always fun hearing those.
The whole like, oh, I buy this camera for color thing, the more we looked into it, like we asked Tyler about this and he was like, dude, once you have 10-bit color, it doesn't matter. And like if you're buying a Blackmagic, I suppose
also
it does.
Workflow.
But
Right. No one wants to go in and drop a load on
That's
all
fair.
their color, right?
Yeah. All right. So we've gone through all of these brands, but there's an issue. there is one camera brand that absolutely ran away with it. 1/3 of the creators we spoke to either were shooting with this camera, switched to this camera, or were considering switching to this camera brand, including Casey Neistat, Austin Evans, and so many others.
Me too.
So,
And us.
after the...
Yeah.
So,
after the...
D.
Hey.
After the break, what is the camera brand that every creator seems to want to switch to? And is it overhyped?
It's Sony.
It's not overhyped.
It's Sony.
We love Sony.
About switching. There's a lot of reasons.
I'm totally game to do the next section.
I know all the reasons.
Crazy.
That's true. So magenta. So magenta.
All right, guys. Sony.
We got to talk about Sony.
Yeah.
Wait, could we do it where everyone at the table just says Sony really quickly?
Sony.
Just like
Sony.
Yeah.
All right, ready?
Yeah. Sony.
All right, guys. Sony.
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 We love Sony.
You know how when you say a word too many times, it starts something. Stop sounding like
Yeah.
That's me now. With
So,
Sony.
okay, creators.
Knee.
Sony.
I have to find a different conjunction.
Hey, there we go.
Creators love this camera. Just to list off a few of the creators that we've seen and haven't seen who use it, we talked to Shua Films. He's the co-founder of this like magazine studio in Chicago, and he also has his own channel called the magazine studio called Powder Blue. His channel is called Shua Films.
You know, when I started vlogging, the main person that got me into it was, of course, Casey Neistat. I think a lot of us. For me personally, when the Sony a7 IV came out, it was kind of the perfect camera for me at the time because it was a nice hybrid of photo and video. And just like the autofocus was always trustworthy when it came to Sony's, especially like the recent years.
Brittany, who's this DP who we talked to about Blackmagic, she switched from Blackmagic for her YouTube videos to the Sony FX3.
I'm always recommending some kind of Sony camera, because it is easy. So I just think it's so versatile. I use it for client work all the time because even clients know about the Sony ecosystem. So that is also a go-to camera for them. So it's just one of the most versatile cameras I've ever used. And I've pretty much used every brand possible.
Clients know like Sony has a rep. And so they actually feel more confident seeing
that's funny.
Yeah.
Like people with that
That's
brand.
true about Red in the past.
Yeah.
We asked Colt, and he said,
So I feel like the A7S III came out and kind of changed the game for everybody. This is everything you could have ever needed. We had great battery life, and the color science was now 10-bit color, so now you can actually color grade it and stuff. And yeah, like the dual native ISO that it has, allowing it to basically shoot. I mean, it sees better than we can see, That really made it so versatile to where you weren't kind of like subject to, like the sun went down, so we can't really shoot anymore. But now you can shoot whenever. There's no more excuses.
We asked Austin about this, and like he switched from Red to a full Sony stack. He said like
FX3.
We shoot entirely on Sony FX3, FX30, A7S III.
There's no complaints I have. Like I like when our A7S3s die, we're just gonna buy another one. There's nothing else that we need. And maybe there's an FX4 or an A7S4 or whatever, and they bring out 4K 1000 or something cool, whatever. But like it has completely changed the way that we shoot videos, and it's crazy to think that it's been 5 years and this camera still feels like it's absolutely badass.
And then we asked Casey about it, and he cited a few key features for that like he just loved.
It was smaller, it was lighter, it felt tougher. It had, I think, the magnesium body or a metal body instead of a plastic body like the T2 series. But most importantly, it had a lens that fit around, that had a hot shoe on the top. So those two were never in competition with one another. And it had the touch the screen to focus, which was a gigantic leap for me. There's a lot of shots where I'm talking to camera, and without my arm entering frame, I tap behind me and it rack focuses to whatever I'm talking about. And I would often also sort of point to what I'm talking about. And I'm able to frame that in real time with my sunglasses without breaking eye contact with the lens, rack the focus, and then frame my finger pointing at something in the background, which is a super dynamic shot. And I was able to do it by like tapping the screen once and filming by myself with no assistance. And I think like Sony was the first camera that enabled me to work with like that level of precision.
That's like all people who use it. We also talked to like Stuart. He said that he shot one shot in a video on the Sony FX3 and he showed it to somebody and they were like, what was that specific shot?
He said he saw the FX6 shot and without knowing, and he was like, wow, that is gorgeous. How did you guys get that? I was like, oh man, the fact that you could point that out without knowing that it changed cameras like that hurts a little bit. So I think that prompted me to think, oh, well, this is kind of important.
The rest of the video is Panasonic, and someone was like, oh, I like that. Like, people are like gravitating to the image of Sony cameras.
Which is a newer thing, to be fair.
It's super new. Okay. What happened?
You really want to know what happened?
Yeah, let's hear it.
Sony got good? I mean, I remember thinking about switching to and using more Sony in the early mirrorless camera days for them. This was A7, A7S, the first ones, which were like super good.
This was instead of like your C100 or?
No, this was like, I shoot red and then I have like sort of smaller crash cam handheld stuff for like R5 basically.
Yeah, right.
And, the built-in mics for Sony's A7 series were good, and the color science was way less magenta and way more usable and maybe even matchable to the red stuff. And I was starting to get like, oh, maybe I'll shoot more Sony stuff. And even to this day, on and off, we roster some Sony cameras. We don't shoot with them very much, but they're very useful.
But Rich, we're
trying to switch us.
Yeah, wait, Rich, give Marquez the pitch right now.
Mm-hmm. Look, when we were at South by Southwest and we were, in the audience, I would have died to get some FX6s for the dual native ISO. It was very dark in there, very challenging situation, and our C70s and R5s could not handle the dark environments.
Yeah,
this is fair.
The less control you have over the environment, the more Sony makes sense because it just makes so much of the process not thoughtless isn't the right way to put it, but just like the last thing you think about is the camera itself.
Yeah.
So Sonys are kind of computers with lenses attached to them. They were very early moving to the mirrorless camera game, and that gave them a leg up in the many years that followed, right? Something that's really good about Sony is mirrorless cameras have a shorter flange distance than non-mirrorless cameras. And a flange distance is the distance between the lens mount and the actual sensor itself. This allows you to adapt basically any lens you want to it that is, covers the full frame sensor. Because of that, a lot of people that shoot Sony will often be able to use like vintage lenses or all these dreamy lenses or all these different things.
And that's the E-mount, right? And that's why everyone loves E-mount.
That's why everyone loves E-mount. You also had 5-axis stabilization. Newer Sony cameras, like you said, had dual native ISO.
Yeah.
Native ISO. ISO is basically electronic gain where you're taking the image on the sensor and you're amplifying that image. There are noise pixels and there are clean pixels. And if you're amplifying the ISO, you're also amplifying the noise.
Right.
So it makes it a lot easier to see. If you have dual native ISO, the native ISO is the cleanest the sensor can be. So once you hit that native ISO, you're back to a very low. Yeah. Sony cameras, very famous for being able to basically see in the dark.
Yeah.
Because they have a low native ISO and a high native ISO.
For the easiest experience to get a high quality video, it's really tough not recommending the Sony A7S III. The low light and stabilization alone just make it so versatile that it's kind of the perfect camera for YouTube.
But over the past few years, Sony hasn't just cemented its cameras as great options, but its entire ecosystem.
Their ecosystem is completely compatible from cheapest to like the color science on the FX3 is the same
because the sensor is exactly the same as the
the E-mount is completely ubiquitous. So it's one of those things where it's like if my dream is to be a cinematographer on a set one day, and if I go and I buy an FX30 like an APS-C cinema camera, I could use that glass one day when I upgrade to a Venice, or I could use that footage on a shoot with a Venice as just like a simple B cam.
Totally.
You know what I mean? And so it just becomes this like insane, like it's just kind of a no-brainer if you have to buy one camera.
Yeah.
But that's also what gave me like massive existential dread about this video because I was like, are we really going to make an hour-long video about what camera
Sony?
you should get? And I was like, oh my gosh, like we're just going to talk about Sony. Like it freaked me out.
I don't know. There's like a lot of different reasons, but they did sort of build out an ecosystem.
Their ecosystem is amazing.
Because again, they have the A7S III and the FX3, and then the FX30 if you don't want to spend as much money for the FX3.
Yeah.
And the FX line is like similar to what Marquez was saying with the red being basically a brain. You build stuff around it. If you need that, you get that. If you don't need that, you get the A7S III. Like they have so many options.
I will admit I am definitely behind on my appreciation of Sony as an ecosystem and as an image because most of my experience with shooting Sony, I have an A7R. I think I've shot most of my video stuff with A7R III and I have an A1. So I have not shot FX series ever. So that's obviously a huge gap. And I think just menu system stuff, little things like about the colors that come out of that camera and me trying to match it with a red is probably unfair.
Yeah.
It's not ever going to quite match.
Yeah.
But how versatile the entire lineup is and how many different options they have across the board to just have a camera for whatever situation we need to get an image from is admirable in a way that makes me want to give it another shot.
And when they released the new sensor that went in the A7S III and the other one,
A7S III and FX3.
FX, that sensor is way better than the old sensor used to be, just in terms of color.
Yeah.
Because Sony sensors used to be like ubiquitous with like
I used to be able
purple,
to
magenta color.
I could watch a YouTube video, a vlog, a clip on YouTube, and I'd be like, ugh, Sony. Like without anyone saying anything, I'd be, ugh.
You could say the same thing, but you could say the same thing about Panasonic.
Yes.
You could say the same thing about a lot of different cameras.
I kind of felt that about Blackmagic, at least back in the day. I could see Canon and basically identify it right off the bat.
Yeah.
And then, there was a little bit of red sprinkled in there and I'd be like, oh, my people. So I still feel like I have that pretty dialed, but there's a lot of Sony development that's happened since then.
Yeah. When we talked to Becca, something that she brought up that was really interesting is how Sony invests in creators.
That is also a massive
She was like,
here. Yeah.
She was like, I went to this Sony event.
Yeah.
And in her words, it was popping. People were there, you know what I mean?
Kids are there.
There's
cool
like
kids
this
shoot
little
Sony.
ecosystem. And like Casey switched to Sony. Like there's all this like clout ecosystem in addition to like the fact that these are good cameras.
Like Sony hosts these like camps and these like projects that people can go
multiple
all work
times a
on
year.
together multiple times a year.
Yeah.
And they invite creators from like various different levels of subscribers. They do this for the same reason that Google makes Chromebooks. Chromebooks are not made to be sold to regular people. They're made to be put in elementary schools and get kids used to Google services. So when they grow up, they keep using the Google ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And so if you're a camera user, especially because the ecosystem of a camera is glass, which is extremely expensive, accessories, of which Sony makes ones that only work on the Sony hot shoes.
Yeah.
If you're investing in this ecosystem, you're way less likely to just sell everything and move out of it. So doing this outreach is like very smart, not just because you will make a sale now, because you're most likely to make many sales in the future.
Marquez, in our interview, asked me, do you have a dream camera to shoot on? And I was like, I don't know.
I have a dream camera.
In FX6, I kind of shrugged because I was one of those kids who just like, I got an A6300. I was on E-mount. I understood the menu system, and I was just like, yeah, I guess I just keep shooting Sony.
Mm-hmm.
But I've come to really like shooting on Canon, which is what we do on the studio channel. But yeah, no, it's I can attest to it. It worked. They got me hooked as a youth. But I think I walked away with like a little bit of like dread here for a couple of reasons. For the video itself, I was like, I don't like this as an ending. I don't want to make a video where I'm just like, well, everyone else shoots Sony, so you should too. Like, it just didn't, like, usually we'd scrap this video, but to be honest with you, like, I introduced myself to a lot of these creators who I really liked through this video, and I was really scared that, like, I was going to embarrass myself in front of these people that I'd spent a long time trying to build a career where I could feel confident talking with them. And I think it was also just like, I don't know if I like the idea of the internet just increasingly looking just like Sony cameras. Like there is something existentially scary and maybe even monotonous about the idea of like, well, you just buy a Sony camera if you want to be like the modern filmmaker YouTube stack. It was kind of depressing to me.
Yeah. I think we all root for competition in general. And so since we know that mirrorless cameras are this wave and Sony is at the crest of this wave, it kind of feels like Sony is the only thing anyone can be using. But I think everyone is on their way, catching up, adding features, making new cameras. And there will be another wave in the future, and it'll be like, oh my God, everyone uses Nikon now or Nikon now. I think there'll be more waves in the future. But at the same time, it's way less regional than smartphones. I think if Sony is dominating in cameras where everyone has free choice, that must just mean they're making really good cameras.
Oh, absolutely.
And I got no problem with shouting out quality of product.
That's fair.
Like they're actually making the best
that's
stuff.
fair.
Okay, fine. They're making the best stuff.
So we had one more conversation with the creator that I think kind of changed my perspective on the whole, like, what is the best camera? Because like the whole take of, oh, the best gear is the one that you have.
David has a take on this.
The best camera is the one you have. I don't think that that's true. But I also don't think that you should just buy a Sony camera.
Yeah.
So we talked with the creator who didn't buy a camera at all. He's a part of a team that grew their channel to over 1 million subscribers.
Using just smartphones?
Using just iPhone 13s.
Wow.
No, iPhone 14s. Apologize.
That's awesome.
So after the break, this conversation with this creator and what it says about making the right camera choice. So after hours of interviews, Rich and I are staring at the timeline for this video, and we're getting nervous because figuring out where the story is getting harder and harder.
Yeah. At this point, we had looked at every popular camera brand and their ecosystem, and it felt like the answer was just buy a Sony, or that every camera brand is great, and to not worry about your gear.
Neither of those answers feel like they're satisfying or that they'll genuinely help you find the right camera for your videos. So out of a bit of desperation in our interview with Casey, I just straight up look at him and I go, Casey, gear still matters, right?
I reject the supposition that it's important to understand gear and have gear. I reject it wholly. Yeah, I mean, I've become much more of a sort of like anti-gear purist. Like, I think when someone says, I love that video you made, it's a beautiful compliment. It makes you feel warm on the inside. When they say, what did you shoot it on? It is the greatest insult you could ever say to someone. It's insulting. And I take it personally. So, you know, especially when talking to newer creators, newer filmmakers, my line is always the gear doesn't matter. And by de-emphasizing the gear, what it does is it puts the focus back on what you uniquely bring to storytelling. And I think right now, like, we're at the most sort of virtuous place in that technology cycle, which is that almost every camera out there, almost every phone out there gives you a look, gives you an aesthetic that is way above the line of good enough to do something great with.
Casey talks about how he saw our S25 Ultra video. And, you know, it's kind of ironic that, like, this is a video about how the tech and the changes in the tech are kind of minimal and small. And the way that, I guess, do you want to describe how you differentiated that video?
I started by doing this really cinematic intro where I turned around and was an allegory where I went from the outside to the inside by going and turning around and cutting through the background and moving to the inside of the set. It was a fun cinematic piece that sort of started the story arc of the video.
Yeah. And in Casey's words, he goes, that one storytelling device was far more interesting to me than the last 20 gear upgrades that we had at a studio. And Marquez promptly asked him to leave.
Yep.
That is a joke. They get along very well. They're both very famous. That kind of speaks to why I think on like a philosophical level, Sony catches on, because Sony is all about enabling people to think about the context of the story and what's on screen and stop thinking about the camera. So you can constantly ask yourself, like, what do I want to depict, or what's the story I want, or what's the context I want to be in? And like, I can trust that this camera will capture that. To an even more sort of extreme extent, we talked with Adam, who's a co-host on this YouTube channel called Jetlag. He's a co-host on this YouTube channel called Jetlag. Have you guys heard of Jetlag? Have you seen this? This show?
I've heard of it.
Guys, this channel is so cool. So it's a travel game show like
The Amazing Race.
Like The Amazing Race. But the whole point of the show is like the chaos factor is 10 times more than any other reality TV show we've ever seen before.
Like in The Amazing Race, you know, somebody might end up in the wrong part of town, but you're never going to end up in the wrong country. And we wanted to make a show where like maybe you end up in the wrong country.
The only way that they could make that show is by just shooting stock iPhone app, no color grading, nothing. Because they're chewing through tons of footage, so they need like a simple post workflow and manageable files. This got me thinking about like shooting on iPhone in general. We asked Tyler about it.
I think if you're just getting started out and you maybe you're not even sure if you're going to stick to filmmaking, if you pick up at least an iPhone 15 Pro, that's when Apple Log was introduced, you can take that as far as you want. You can make it look as good as those other cameras and learn all the most important lessons of filmmaking with just an iPhone. Don't add any more than you need. The most essential things are a wireless mic, which both Rode and GGI make great tiny ones right now. And then an iPhone clamp. I designed one called the Stalman clamp that what's important to me, like whatever clamp you choose, the most important part is that it is rock solid. So like when you press record, it doesn't vibrate your phone. If you're doing something like transitions, you don't want the phone to like move in between. So looking for some kind of tripod clamp that is never going to change the shot when you're operating the camera.
Dude, I get so many questions about people asking me like, oh, should I buy this like $3,000 guitar? And it's like, no, it's not going to make you better. Like whatever you have, just practice on it.
The storytelling is always going to be more important than the video quality. And that's actually where a lot of people that are just starting to get into making videos sort of like lose track.
Yes, 1,000%.
Because
agreed.
it's really easy to just look at YouTube and get obsessed with the gear.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I think there are a lot of people who watch a YouTube video from a YouTuber who's been doing it a long time and sees fancy editing or cinematography or camera work or something and goes, I want to make YouTube videos. What gear do I have to buy to be able to do that? And it's not about that. Like the video process and the I want to make videos thing is all of the pre-work, the writing, the storyline, that stuff, and getting people to care about that thing. And then if you have more time or if you're making like an amazing video, then you can focus on the other stuff, building it up instead. But yeah, that I think people get distracted by the gear and trying to make a good video gear.
So I think Adam had this really cool analogy. Do you guys know the show like Candid Camera? Like the you guys know the show like Candid Camera? Like OG.
Really old.
So the Candid Camera was originally Candid Microphone. It was an audio show, and it existed because mics got small enough where people couldn't see the microphone, and that technological innovation enabled that new format and that new creative format. Candid Camera, same thing. Camera got small enough where people would be candid on camera, and so it actually changed the contents of the story. And so Adam was like, that's kind of how he thinks about jet lag.
You know, we've done other projects since where we did use like real cameras and like lighting setups and stuff. And I think it really opened our eyes to like, thank God we filmed the show the way we do, because you could not make our show if we tried to film it a different way, frankly. The fact that you can make something on iPhones is an invitation for people to think, what can I make now with an iPhone that I couldn't have made before when iPhones weren't this good? And I think that if you can come up with a compelling answer to that question, you'll have a format, you'll have something that is new and interesting and that actually takes advantage of this, as opposed to just making the same thing but lazier because you don't have to put in the work of setting up a better camera.
You shoot on Red because your whole thing is MKB HD. And like that's a part of your ethos, and it amplifies a part of who you are.
Every day we put like clothes on to like feel ourselves, right? And sometimes when we wear a certain jacket, it makes us feel like more powerful or better. And I think you can translate that to cameras. Like sometimes when we hold a camera, it makes us feel like a professional. It gives us confidence.
Does the camera bring joy? Like, is it going to enrich your life? Is it going to make you inspired to do the best work of your entire life?
Famously, Mr. Beast does not shoot 4K, right? Is that still the case?
All Sony, I don't know if it's not 4K, but he does kind of just put any camera in your hands, and as long as he has coverage, that's the only thing I care about.
It used to at least be the case that he didn't shoot 4K because he wanted to give you that sort of home video kind of vibe.
This actually happened.
You want the camera to be above a floor where it's not like it's not hindering your story or your video production.
480p.
And in Jimmy's case, it's funny. He also wants it to be below a certain ceiling so it's not distracting.
Exactly.
Fine.
Yeah. So I think my big takeaway is that gear is a multiplier. All it does is it makes what's great about you greater. But if you don't know what that is, you can't multiply anything by zero.
Yeah.
Damn.
Ooh, that's a bar.
Bars.
Yeah.
So if you like this behind the scenes video, I'm sure you'll love all the behind the scenes videos and ensemble videos that we do on the studio channel all the time.
And with that, I would like to say, I think the real best camera you can get is the friends we made along the way.
So gentlemen, do you feel like you learned something?
I do. I love the multiplier. I think that's a great like bow tie on it. Like gear is exciting and interesting to us because we're kind of nerds.
Yeah.
And that's where we live on Waveform. We're in the weeds and we love the gear and what it unlocks. But it only unlocks the multiple of the thing that you're trying to make. You got to have the idea. You got to have the seed. If you're just watering dirt, it doesn't matter how great that watering can is, you need a great seed. So
Rich, you come up with an analogy.
Oh no. It's like
50% of my diet is Cholula.
there we go. And the conclusion is the best camera is the camera in your pocket.
No, it's not. The best camera is a possible.
That should be our outro.
No, I would say the best camera is the camera that does the thing that you want to do to tell your story.
Yeah.
The best camera.
it's a V Raptor XL. It's clearly a V Raptor XL.
That is the best camera.